Hey guys, and welcome to a Cloud Developer channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how to actually go ahead and start using your AngularJS application that we built in the prior video. And I'm going to show you a couple of basics of how do you actually start it up and the different things you can actually do with it. So let's go ahead and open up PowerShell and navigate to that folder. So it's located in the Drive Projects, Node, and then Cloud Developer. In this folder, you'll notice that all the different files that we have actually gone through. So the basic startup process for how do you actually launch your application is by simply typing in ng and typing in serve, and not server. Let's serve. So this will actually allow the AngularJS CLI command to be able to start up the application. And what you see it doing right now is it's actually building all the different components of your application, including the execution of the actual application server itself to host this application. So now it actually started up. You'll notice that there's a comment that says the live development server is listening on localhost port 42,000. So if we go ahead and open this up and go to localhost port 42,000, you'll notice that you get this application. So this is your application that is actually running. So now what we want to be able to do is actually open up Visual Studio Code in this folder. We'll type in code and I'll just give it the actual path, and it opens it up for me. Now, in here, what I want to be able to do is, let's say I want to modify the title of the application. So I'll go ahead and actually dock this to the right, and then on the left, I'll have my Visual Studio Code open. And you'll notice that it says, welcome to the app. So the one thing I wanted to show you is the way that AngularJS actually works is it actually allows you to do what's called a live reload or live refresh. So this is very handy as you go through and build your application, because it allows you to see changes in almost real time, depending on the size of your application, obviously. But what I'll show you real quick is notice that it says welcome to app. And I want to be able to go ahead and change that to say something like welcome to Cloud Developer channel. And this is actually located inside of the app component TS file. And if I open this up, you'll notice that there's a title property on this app component. So let me go ahead and actually type in clouddeveloper.io. And I'll go ahead and click save here by just pressing Control S. And it did that, and you'll notice as soon as it did that, the application on the right hand side actually changed. Now if I open up PowerShell, you'll notice that it compiled successfully, and then it has a particular hash that it uses. It knows that something changed, and then the amount of time it actually took, as well as the different information that it actually rendered. So in this case, it sees that the main bundle.js file was actually updated. So this is something very handy to actually know about. So let's go ahead and actually update this to say welcome to Cloud Developer channel. Now you notice that the title, it was just app, but how do you add something that says channel? So since the title of this application is actually clouddeveloper.io, I don't actually want to put that channel in here, but I do want to actually update it in HTML. And you'll see that there's an app component HTML file here. And if I open this up, it's kind of hard to see. Let me expand this real quick. You'll notice that in this HTML file, it actually says welcome to the double curly braces and title. This is actually the double curly brace concept is actually something that exists within a templating engine of Angular, and this actually gets updated when the component itself actually gets executed. The component will pass in its properties into the templating engine and will replace the values that are specified in that object. So that's how it knows to inject that clouddeveloper.io into the section. But what I want to be able to do is put in a space and type in channel. So since it updated here, I'll go ahead and press save, and it actually updated on the right hand side automatically for me. So this is some basic information. Now, another important thing to know about is there's a set of tests that actually execute for this application, and you want to make sure that you're constantly updating your tests to make sure that everything is running correctly. So what I mean by that is, let's go ahead and actually close the browser here and go back to PowerShell. And I'll stop the actual web server here by pressing Control-C, and I'll press Y. And then in here, what I want to be able to do is actually I want to execute a set of tests to make sure everything is actually working correctly or the way I expect it to. So if you remember back when you, if you watched the prior video, there's actually a command that's called test. So it's located right here. So what I should be able to do is actually go back to the PowerShell window and type in ng test. And when I run this, it will execute a set of tests for my application after it actually finishes compiling them. Also, you'll notice that it actually started up a different server on a different port, and now it's actually executing. And the first thing you notice that I have 3 spec files, or the test files, and 2 of them actually failed. And one of the things that it tells you is the app component should have a title with a value of app, and then the app component should render a title in h1 tag, and it does. However, it also complains that the title is actually different. Right now it says welcome to clouddeveloper.io channel, and it actually was expecting to say, or to see, welcome to app with 2 exclamation points. So in the tests in the background, you'll see that actual it gives you debugging information here. So how do we fix this problem? So the thing that we want to do is we want to actually go ahead and find those tests. Now each component actually has their own file. That's the convention that AngularJS uses. So in here, we'll actually see that app.component.spec.ts file exists for that given component. And if we open it up, you'll see that there's a set of import statements that tell the test framework where to actually get the testing components for execution of those tests, as well as the actual component that is going to be tested. And then the actual logic about how do we actually test, which component gets tested, and what to test for is defined down in the file. Now, the first thing we'll notice is there's actually 3 tests. Here's one, here's another one, and here's the third one. Now, out of the actual tests that we executed, only 2 failed, not 3. The first one you'll see if I click on this spec list link here. It'll actually tell me you should create the app actually succeeded. Now, why is that? The reason for that is because all this is doing is actually just instantiating a new instance of the app component itself to validate that that actually works. Just in case you put some initialization logic that would have broken that functionality, then this would actually fail. But in this particular case, it's only the content that failed. So let's take a look and see what we can do to fix it. So the second test actually says it should have a title as app. Now we know that's no longer true, and we want to actually change this to reflect what the new expected behavior is, and it should say clouddeveloper.io. And you'll notice that I'm only putting in clouddeveloper.io, and that is because this is actually what we're testing for. We're testing to make sure that the actual app.title value is actually clouddeveloper.io. So let's go ahead and save this and go back. And now you can actually see that we have 3 specs and only 1 failure. Now, the second test itself is actually passing. Now, let's take a look to see what we need to do for the third one. So in this particular case, should render the title in h1 tag. Now, not only is this actually expecting that the title gets outputted into the actual compiled section of your HTML, inside of an h1, but also make sure that the actual content of that matches what we expect. Now in this case, we can't use clouddeveloper.io anymore. We actually have to put in welcome to clouddeveloper.io channel. Go ahead and save that. And then when it ran, you'll notice that it succeeded. So this is very important to know that you constantly want to keep updating all of these tests, because this is actually going to help you speed up your testing and development and deployment cycle to production, because now you don't have to have a person sitting there and manually constantly clicking buttons or checking things off, because it becomes error prone. And just imagine if you have hundreds if not thousands of different features and components you want to be able to test. So as you make changes to your code that changes your behavior and functionality of your application, add new functionality to these tests, as well as keep them updated, and constantly run this to make sure that everything is working correctly. So this is one set of testing functionality. Another one that is important to know about is the end-to-end testing. So let's see what that actually looks like. So the end-to-end testing is another framework that gets used within your application. Let's go ahead and actually end this. And what this actually will do, we're going to go ahead and run an end-to-end test, and you do that by typing in ng e2e, and this will actually run a framework called Protractor. Now, Protractor depends on a couple of things. It depends on making sure that you have a Java runtime installed. So go ahead and download and install the latest version of Java JDK, which is a Java development kit. And that's required in order to execute Selenium. And Selenium is your automated browser testing framework. And this execution that we're going to do right now is actually going to execute the Java component, make sure that the process starts, make sure it's on a given port, and then execute a set of tests. Now, this is something that you can run on your build server in an automated fashion that continuously check your code to make sure that all of your latest components are actually built correctly. Whereas you would run ng test in your local development environment, and this is something that every developer should do. So if you notice that it's actually starting up the actual process here, and one of my tests is actually failing here. So the expected welcome to Cloud Developer channel equals to welcome app. Now let's actually take a look where this file is located. So there's the app e2e spec ts, and it expects a particular value, which actually didn't get updated. So let's go ahead and navigate to that file. And this is only one test in here. And we'll go ahead and actually update this to clouddeveloper.io channel. I'll go ahead and save this. And I'll go ahead and run the test once more. There you go. And you can see that the test actually completed and succeeded. So this is very important information for any developer or person starting out to do web development to know about, because the more tests you have, the better and easier for you to be able to catch issues before you try to deploy it into production. So another thing that I want to actually show you is how do you actually access this particular application. Let's say if you have a server that you want to actually do your development on, but the actual browser that you're using might be on a different computer. So for example, in my scenario, I'm actually doing development on a server in a virtual machine. Now I have other screens that are on my desktop or attached to my desktop, and I'm actually remoting into it using a remote desktop or RDP session, which is only using one RDP connection or one screen through that RDP connection. Now, I can use more if I wanted to, or another thing that I would like to be able to actually do is just open up another browser session and just simply navigate to it as from my development or desktop machine, and just pointed to that server where the actual code is executing. So in this particular case, I can show you an example of that even from the same server. So right now I'm on a VM called dev machine, And let's say I wanted to be able to navigate to my application by just simply typing in HTTP dev machine 4200. And so in this particular case, if I actually press enter, you'll notice that it actually doesn't do anything. And one of the reasons is because I don't actually have it started. So let's do ngserve. And if you remember before, it actually said that the server is listening on localhost 4200. And it's going to go ahead and start it up. And if I try to refresh, it still doesn't work. Now, if I go to localhost, it actually loads. So what's the problem? Well, by default, Angular actually starts up the node server using localhost and port 4200. And for security reasons, you typically would not want to use this as your endpoint to allow other people to be able to actually hit your server or hit your development machine as you're actually doing development testing, because somebody can actually try to hack into your computer or do other things that you might not be expecting to, even things like putting a load on your development machine by simply doing a denial of service type of an attack that could cause to have issues during your development experience. But in this particular case, I don't actually care about anybody trying to get into my computer, because this is my environment, and it actually makes it easier for me to do development as well. So I'll go ahead and actually stop this, and I'll show you how to actually fix this problem. So one of the things you want to do is when you type in ngserve, you can do --help, and it will tell you a few different things about this serve command. One of those things would be there's actually a command or a switch here called --host, and by default it's actually specifying localhost. There's also --port, which defaults to 4200. That's how it knows without you specifying anything. That's going to be localhost and port 4200. But there's also this other parameter here called --public host, and by default it's actually not specified. Now, we're going to use a combination of these elements here to be able to say, I want to be able to serve this page up and allow remote server or client to be able to connect to the server. So you do this by typing in ngserve and doing --host. And we'll specify 0.0.0.0. The reason you do this is basically you're telling the server to go ahead and listen to any connection on any IP address, not just localhost. Because if you were to specify something like 127.0.0.1, which is a local loopback, which is only available to this computer, then you'll also be restricting who can connect to it. By specifying all zeros, you basically say you serve it on any IP that's available on this computer. And then we're not going to specify port because we're okay with using port 4200, but we do want to specify --public host. And in here we'll specify the full URL. And we'll specify HTTP dev machine and the port number here, and press and do the / as well. And if you wanted to, you could also do verbose to give you a little bit more output. So in this particular case, we'll start this up. And I didn't put in the right command, so we actually want to do public -host. Press enter again. Maybe if I can actually learn how to type, I want to put in public host. And now it's going to go ahead and launch this for us. So you'll notice that it's listening on port IP 000, and also it's listening on localhost 4200. And because we specified -verbose, it actually gave us a little bit more information, including things like the actual files, their sizes that are being generated, things like that, and the specific files that are actually being changed and served. So now if we go back here, we'll notice that localhost 4200 is actually loading. And let's see if this dev machine 4200 is actually working. So I'll go ahead and refresh, and you can see it actually started up without problems. So this is something that was very helpful for me. Hopefully this is going to be helpful for you. So and the last thing I want to show you is actually how do you take a look at the source code. So and how do you generate an optimized version of the actual source code for your application. So to show you this real quick, if you right click and go to view source, you'll notice that you see the inline bundle, you see a couple other files that are being generated here. Now if you actually type in or click on the main bundle.js, you'll see all these different pieces of content here, the JavaScript. And then you have the styles bundle, you have the inline bundle itself. And if you start looking at this, you can actually read and get a basic understanding of your application and how things are loading. If I go ahead and actually press F12 here, and it loads the developer toolbars, developer tools, you'll notice that all these files are being loaded here. Now let's say you actually want to get this ready for production, and how do you do that? So the way you would do this is, I'll go ahead and terminate this session, and I'm going to go ahead and do the ng serve, but I also am going to specify another parameter here. It's going to be called -prod, and what this is going to allow me to do is actually compile the packages in a different manner, and you'll notice actually gives us an error, but it's really just warning you that don't use this to host your application in production, because this particular web server wasn't made to actually be hosting production type websites. But in this case, what happened was it actually generated all of this information, and you'll notice that there's also the file names are actually different, and they have these strings inside of them, and this is how it kind of knows about versioning. So as your files change for production scenario, it actually puts some, it builds them differently. It actually removes spaces and other things that your users in production typically wouldn't care about looking. So you don't want people to look at your source code and try to understand the behavior of your application. So there's many different reasons, including security as well. So we'll go ahead and refresh this. And if we actually go to page source, you'll notice that the content actually looks different, and the files look different as well, and there's no spaces anymore. Now if I open up the developer tools again and refresh once more, you'll see that the files changed as well here. And if I click on this inline, you'll see that the actual content of them is significantly different. You no longer can actually understand what each things actually even say. So you would actually have to try to reverse engineer this, and let me tell you, it's not going to be very easy because of the amount of content that's in here. So this is kind of a basic guide of how do you begin to use your AngularJS application once you actually created it, and a quick sample of how do you maintain test files or your tests for your application, and how do you actually prepare it for production deployment. In a future video, I'm going to be talking about starting to actually change the look and feel of this application. We're going to start making actual changes to the HTML content structure and start building out our basic homepage layout itself. So if you have any questions, leave your feedback and comments in the section below. If you like this content, go ahead and subscribe to this channel, as I'll be continuously making more videos about this process and other things related to software development. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and have a good day.